Very good. Well, Warren Buffett is quoted as having said, "It isn't until the tide goes out that you find out who's swimming naked." And I'm a podcaster. At least that's part of what I do by trade. And I don't have a button that I can hit to say recording, and so I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable up here. So I'm just checking with my guys in the back that we're recording this, because I'd love to share this with the feed someday. So anyways, since I believe we're going to move on, and I'm just going to welcome this panelist, this panel of folks that are going to help us kind of put a bow on this conference, and I'm looking forward to this opportunity to have a conversation with them, and I'd love to give you guys the opportunity to ask each other questions throughout this time too. So if you've had a burning question that you wanted to ask the rest of your fellow panelists, I invite that, and then we'll end this discussion with some time. We've got a couple of board members with handheld mics that have agreed to walk around and allow you guys opportunity also to ask questions, and so we'll have that built in there. So I'm going to pretend like you guys have a folder in front of you that has a bio that tells you about who these guys are and what they've done, and I'm also going to pretend like they've all spoken to you for about an hour throughout this week. And so we're not going to take a lot of time with introductions. We're just going to dive into some questions. And so please take notes. Be prepared to ask questions when we get to that point, and we'll just dive into questions. While Zach and Glenn were speaking, I asked my boys, my two oldest boys are here this week, and my beautiful wife, who without her the podcast would not happen. So if you've appreciated the podcast over the last 6 years, please give her a round of applause. I really appreciate her. But I asked my two boys to take notes during Glenn and Zach's talk, and to come up with a question for me to ask them. And so I'm going to start with those questions now for Glenn and Zach. And we'll start with my son Braden's question for Glenn. And that is, what is the best way to help your land capture 100% of the rain you get?
That's a great question. I guess it's about, I talked a little bit about what the history of that landscape was and what the prehistory of that landscape was. And that would be the first go-to for me, to find out how it was designed. Because I think the functionality was at its peak before we came along. And that doesn't mean I want to go back. That doesn't mean I'm a preservationist or something like that. I think we, as humans, are part of the ecosystem. That's part of the design. But I think we need to learn from that context first to figure out what the best way to do that is. And it's one of those it depends questions. It might even be something crazy like, we need a fire here, which is the craziest idea. I live in the West, and most people absolutely hate wildfire. But yet I see there's such a huge, huge piece of the pie missing when we just extirpate fire from these landscapes that have adapted under a fire regime. The fire regime in our country is 40 to 45 years in low elevation Doug fir forests. That's where we do a lot of our grazing. And I've done it because I used to be a forester. We do tree ring analysis, and we could see this like clockwork across millennia, that fire was important. And yet we see fire as this thing that removes vegetation, removes cover. And those are against the principles, the 5 principles of soil health, obviously. But yet, it may be fire to be the thing that is exacting in what that land needs. So it's a huge depends. It may be it needs grazing. It may be that it needs 10 years of rest. We have this ground that's 400 acres of just roasted sagebrush ground. It's almost devegetated, very little organic matter when we got the place, and we're slowly but surely making progress there, but only after rest periods of 6 years and grazing at the right time, and judging by when rainfall happens. So I'd like to say, yes, this is the formula. But like most of the stuff we do, when you work with nature, you find out that chaos is often a formula, and chaos is our partner. And we just got to be proactive when we live in this realm and be always thinking and be thinking about something that may be quite out of the box. So that doesn't give you an answer to the question. It's just, it depends.
Thank you. Zach, this question's for you, from my son Braden. How has the stock cropper increased diversity at your place?
That's another good question. The obvious answer is, through all the extra plant and animal species, that we've added. Like I said yesterday, we've 10x'd at least the biodiversity we have compared to just what you normally see in Iowa, which is just a cornfield or a soybean field, and that only has a root out there that's feeding the soil for 3.5 months out of the year. But that's probably the obvious answer. The other thing is what I've been exposed to in the diversity of people that have stopped in to visit and to see what I'm doing, and then coming to things like this and being able to, I don't know, I was telling this to Jay before I came up here, coming to these events compared to the old space and where I would be at for meeting season right now in my old life within the big ag world. This is just so much more life-giving and interesting, and the folks that you can come and network with, that diversity of thought and openness to things has been probably just as much, or just as important, if not more important, than the diversity we've brought back to the farm. Because I know there's things I'm going to take back from today and yesterday that's going to make the system I'm working on better, and I'm grateful for everyone here for that opportunity. So,
yeah, I would have to imagine, and Jay, maybe you can help us with this, that the diversity of microbes would be much higher, or maybe just the number of them. I'm not sure if it's just the number or if it's also the diversity of microbes in a system like that, where you're integrating livestock and you're having diverse covers between the rows of corn and some of those things. Would they be more diverse there, or just higher in number?
Well, I think what you're going to find, the microbial world, it's a community. And it starts at the top of if you take corn, starts at the top of the plant and goes to the bottom of the lowest root tip. And the microbes are in the plant, they're on the plant, they're in the soil, they are present all over. And so when you look at a system that Zack has, you're accelerating biological time. So he's making something happen in 1 year that if he didn't have that plant diversity, animal diversity, if he didn't have that and do some managed grazing on it, then those things are going to take much longer to occur. And so it's going to be a combination. I think your diversity is going to be better. So I'm an old monitoring person. My background is monitoring, and it's monitoring soils. That's where I started. Then I went into plants, and you start to realize how little you know, and then you start to go down this road and gather up information. And what got me interested in Zack's concept for Iowa, or for any cropland at all, was that he's accelerating biological time. That really caught my interest. And we're just stepping into the microbe community more and more and more, and we're starting to realize how the rhizophagy scenario works. And really, he's got a system there that brings so much to the table in so many ways. And as a population of people, we can benefit from this tremendously. Water quality alone, Zack.
Right, yeah. The one thing I'd add onto that is that's one thing I haven't done, is really capture the difference of what's actually happened underneath the soil. And that's partly because we haven't had enough rotation time on the ground. But I think this year I just had somebody come up to me and offered to come out and do some sampling down to depth to hopefully start to quantify that, so that we can not only share the yield data like I shared yesterday, but actually some of the stuff that's beyond my pay grade, but more Jay's style, that we can kind of quantify that we're actually speeding up biological time is like what he referred to. So.
Okay. We'll move on to my other son, Calvin's question. And he's got the same question for both Zach and Glenn. And we'll let Cooper answer this question too, because we already heard Jay's answer to this question. But we'll start with Zach and Glenn. His question for both of you, we'll start with Zach this time. What is your goal?
What is my goal?
He told me earlier this week to throw him softball questions, and my son Calvin asked the hardest question. So,
yeah, no, it's. I guess I've got a lot of different goals of what I'm doing, but the primary goal is to leave things in a better place than what we found it. And I've worked for 20 years, kind of going in a different direction, thinking I was doing that, but now I had my midlife crisis, and I'm kind of reset myself, and because I'm officially past 40 now by a couple years, and so I want, hopefully when I retire in, say 20 years, that whatever we've done, whether it's the stock cropper or if it's not, or if it's somebody that, got inspired here and came up with something better, if we were a part of that progression, I'll die a happy man. So,
Glenn, what's your goal?
So for me, it's it's not really a material thing at all. It's just that, I'm fairly new. Well, I've been in and around agriculture, but as far as a sole practitioner and, that ranch came into our lives about 30 years ago. So I guess I'm nearly a lifetime practitioner, but through all that time, I see so much hopelessness in agriculture, and there's a lot of despair. We heard about suicide today, and I have my neighbors telling their kids that there's no place for them on the ranch or farm. And for me, the goal is hope, just to spread a word of hope that there's hope. That we have lost our way, and we don't got to beat ourselves up over it, but that there's hope, and there's this incredible possibility. That's, I think, the thing that's most intriguing is, that's the word that I would come away with walking out of this conference. I'd say, I came away from that conference, and there's possibility. And in possibility lies hope, and where we have hope, we have a future. And the future, it might not be with me, but, if we can instill just that idea, that future then is in the hands of others, your kids and my kids and all these kids that come to help us. And it just comes real to me every year because I feel like those interns, those seasonal employees we have ride for us, they come away with these things. They can't put their brain or finger exactly on what or how to go about it, but they know there's hope and they know there's possibility in this thing called agriculture in a world where everybody else is dissing it and, doesn't see the value. And we're talking about creating food out of biological slime, and and there's no rightness to those things, but they feel rightness here and a hope.
Cooper, what's your goal?
That's a big question. Congratulations on raising a son who's so perceptive. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm from a ranching family in Montana, part of the 5th generation, and my own personal goal is having a ranch that's viable and thriving and robust and magnetic. That if the 6th generation so chooses, that it's there for them. And so that goal has led to all these other goals. That's kind of precipitated, or it's made it a necessity to search out all of, this is a conversation Clay and I'd had last week. One of my favorite things, and one of the things that just drives me, is searching for what is possible. And that's led to kind of discovering a different model for ranching in West Central Montana, different types of grazing practices, different types of genetics, all of this that drives towards that end goal of creating a ranch that's just bursting at the seams on all levels.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions. I'll ask the same question basically in a vice versa form, and I'll start with Jay and Glenn answering the question. We'll start with Jay. What does Cooper and Zack and my generation need to learn from your generation?
Well, I think the story I would have on that particular question is that we all learn from standing on other people's shoulders and their accomplishments. You know, none of us have really done a whole lot on our own, right? And so I think the other thing that you find is sometimes it's nothing more than asking them. And I think that transfer of knowledge, you know, it's kind of like two experienced board members leaving a board, right? We got to have that because none of us live forever, right? And we come out of it. And I think one of the advantages of getting older, I can only come up with one advantage of getting older. I thought about this on my 70th birthday. And that is you have more mistakes and occasionally success to look back on. Collectively, you call it experience, right? You have a longer period of time to look back on, okay? Other than that, I couldn't come up with much of a good reason to get older. Most of them aren't so great. And so I think there's the transfer. I think the transfer, the thing that we've all seen, I think we've all seen this on regenerative agricultural communities, is there's a willingness to share information. Everybody here is sharing information. And so that's the highest form of learning, is when you have that occurring, because you don't even know you're being educated. You're sitting there talking to somebody and you're gaining something from that. And I think that's really can go down to virtually any, whether it's youth or younger adults, et cetera. It's so important that we have younger people. I mean, you look at all the younger people that we're presenting today. To me, anyone beneath 70s, younger. And it's so important to have them because it's vital. We have to have that. And I think that's a big part of our future going forward, and we need to support them. So I think it's not just on the shoulders of the younger individuals. I think the older individuals have to be willing to do that too. They got to recognize that these are the people that are going to carry the day, not you. They're going to carry the day. And these three individuals here, they are all sharing information about their own enterprises. Well, that's a whole nother level, and that they're willing to do that. I mean, I can't say enough good about that.
Yeah. Glenn, what do you think our generation needs to learn from yours?
How old do you think I am?
Slightly older than me.
You know, it makes me think of this. One time, my dad and I were, he was out of farming at this time. He's in his... He's passed away now, but at this time he was in his late 80s, and we're at a farm down in southern Idaho, and it's a Dutch dairy. You know, he knows the guy. They speak Dutch together, and they even slip into Fries every now and then. And we're looking at these Holsteins, you know. And I said to my dad, I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "What do I think about what?" And I said, "Well, what do you think about this whole thing?" And he said, "Well, these cows don't live very long." I said, "No, 2.5 lactations is the Idaho average right now." He says, "You know, back in 1935, we were milking 15 head in Friesland twice a day by hand. That was a good size operation. Average cow size was 900 pounds. And those cows at the top end were producing 30 pounds a day. These are going 90. And, you know, he didn't have to relate to me what the problems were, you know. He went on and talked about how, you know, a 15-year-old cow was common, and they were all on grass. They didn't feed any grain. And he just left it lay right there, you know, and that to me was wisdom. You know, he saw the difference, and he didn't have to go through and connect all these dots. They already connected in his head. And I think that my wife read some article the other day, and she said, this article says that people who are young, like these guys, they got fluid intelligence. That means they're shifting gears and they're going through all these different landscapes in their mind. And she said the article says that you and I have crystalline intelligence. And I said, are you sure you didn't mean concrete? Because sometimes I do feel like concrete, but she said, no, it's crystalline. And it's crystalline because the crystalline intelligence is no longer super agile about change. But the crystalline intelligence has an overview. They have an overview based on experience, knowledge, skills, history. And that's the value. For me, that's the value. That was the value in my dad. It was that crystalline intelligence. He was able to make linkages that I wouldn't be able to make. And I think that's the hugest value, in our older generation is realizing that and being able to receive that and invest in that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, very good. In the providence of God or the wisdom of Cindy or some combination of the two, we've got a really cool mix here of different generations and different backgrounds. And so this next question is going to flip the way I've been asking these questions kind of on its head. And I'm going to ask Jay and Zack to tell me, we'll start with Jay, what can the farm learn from the range?
Well, I think the rangeland, the grasslands are what built our soils, okay? And so I think that's the first thing. And then how did they do this? Well, in the northern plains, the last glacial water left, for instance, like the Red River Valley, left approximately 9,000 years ago. Okay, from that time, you have a diversity of perennial plants. So an average in Burleigh County would be 100 plus species per acre. Now they all give a different exudate. So you start thinking about that. Forbs, grasses, legumes, there's a diversity of plants, okay? Now, that's the diversity of food. So when you go through the line, and the buffet line, and there's a diversity of food, we really like that. When we go through that line and it had only broccoli in it, every meal, we go through there and get our broccoli, we don't do as well. And after a while, we would die. And so I think the first thing is it built our soils. I think the second thing is it really taught us that the animals played a huge role in it. And so we had the grazing ruminants and we had the predators, and the predators moved them. And so Aldo Leopold, if you read any of his information, he talks about the wolf that was shot on the mountain, and they're watching it die. And he said the green light is fading from this wolf's eyes. And he makes the comment that only that mountain is going to know what that means to the surrounding area. And what he's talking about is the wolf moved the ruminants. And the ruminants grazed the entire slopes and sides and ravines, and they grazed everywhere, and they were always moving. So you always had this regrowth occurring. You always had exudates going into the soil. It was the whole functioning hydrology. And so he looks at that. Well, now you take all these plants out, you take the 100 plus out, and you replace them in conventional agriculture with how many? With one, right? And then you start taking a look and you start wondering why your carbon levels fall, right? And so it taught us, I think the rangeland is really what taught us soil health principles. Nature taught us those. And I think for me, it's been one of how do we mimic that? If we're going to have an agricultural system, how do I mimic what I've seen in native rangeland? So I've always been a supporter of high amounts of diversity in a cover crop. The reason I support that so much is because that's how nature did it, okay? And you can plant one, but it's a better impact if you have multiple, right? And so it taught us, I think it taught us the principles.
Zack, anything? What can the farm learn from the range?
Well, the farm's got a lot to learn because, to his point, we've kind of gotten this one-track mindset where we're just thinking about one crop. And from the world that I came from, or I still am. I'm still there for sure. But farmers think very linearly now, as far as inputs equal outputs, and they have no real concept, or they're not really trained. I know when I went to university at Iowa State, it was talked about a little bit, but when you get out into the real world and industry, until the last couple of years with the soil health piece, and there's such a small fragment of the farming population that gets even exposed to it. There's a huge education piece where you've kind of got to lead the horses to water to get them to even think in the cyclical nature of what happened on the range and what was here before on the prairies, the prairie pothole region that I come from in Iowa. And most people don't even think in that mindset. But there's a big shift that needs to happen, in my opinion, educational shift, to get the vast majority of farmers who aren't at something like this to start thinking in the terms of a cycle versus a linear line, inputs equal outputs. So,
Cooper, what do you think that the range can learn from the farm?
So before Jay had finished his, I was thinking, well, in Jay's interpretation, the soil health principles came from watching and observing rangeland. But it was farms and farmers who distilled the soil health principles and then helped share that with everyone else, which I think is truly helped a lot of people understand and wrap their head around how to, kind of the important benefits when proper grazing does happen, how to distill that. And the other thing that can be learned, that ranchers can learn and should emulate more, I believe, that farmers are so good at, is we get really sucked into measuring productivity on a per head basis, and that's a dangerous measurement. It needs to be put relative to something, and measuring productivity, pounds weaned per acre instead of pounds weaned, or number of pounds weaned per cow would be a good example, right? If you're weaning more pounds per acre, but your calves are smaller, but your neighbor is weaning heavier calves but fewer pounds per acre, you're going to be more profitable. And so it's in all of these measurements, scrotal measurements for bulls, and all of this comes from Johann Zeitzman, again, who's had a huge impact on me. Scrotal measurements for bulls should also probably be put in relation to individual weight. When we select our bulls, it's pound or vertical centimeters in relationship to individual weight, amount of pounds per vertical inch, meat to bone ratio. So everything just kind of needs to put into relation to itself. We get very easily sucked into absolute measurements.
Yeah. Glenn, anything come to your mind? What the range can learn from the farm?
I think that for us that operate on the grasslands and on the range, I think that we've gotten really detached from what we're about, the reason we're out there. And I think farmers are still fairly connected to the fact that they produce food. It might be food for livestock, but it's food. Maybe it's food for an ethanol plant, but I heard a talk today and somebody said, hey, what about the DDGs? And, that's going back into livestock. Whether or not that's good, but it's still, it's a food product going back to feed something. And so often I see, us in ranching, we just get detached from that. We thankfully have found a way back. We've reconnected with people who are the eaters of food. But, we've turned cattle into this commodity, and, they're on the Chicago board as this commodity. And sure, corn is too, but it's always in, the quantity of feedstuffs. And I feel like a lot of ranchers are just detached from that reality. But it's what we do. And, for me, that's where the range just really connected when I had those two PhDs come out, Dr. Fred Provenza and Dr. Stefan Van Vliet. All of a sudden, they recognized the power of that biodiversity. Jay talks about 100 species on a given acre, on total range through all our elevations, it's 2,200 species that are available to those cows. And I think it was here on the tall grass as well. And there's this nutrient possibility that's inconceivable that then would get transferred into food for even us. And that really excites me. That's a really, really cool thing. And I think we've detached ourselves from that.
I'm going to go back to Cooper and Zach with the next question, and I want to ask the same question, vice versa, that I asked Jay and Glenn. What does our generation need to learn from them? Start with Zach, arbitrarily.
What does our generation have to learn from them? Humility, I guess, that would be one thing. And, and I think, I don't know these guys as I do like my own father. I've had the road that my dad had to go through to get me to the point that I'm at was a lot tougher than the road that I've had. And to be grateful for the sacrifice and stuff that put me in the position to even be able to do something like this. I think a lot of people, further you get down the generations of farming, I think the wealth ball rolls on and you think you've done something, but the people before you are really the ones that have paved the way. And I think sometimes I see a lot of people in my generation lose sight of that. And so I think having gratitude and realization and respect, I still like. There's a lot of times I don't want to talk to my dad about the progressive stuff because he clams up. But there's a lot of times I need to have that reassurance because he's been there before and seen some of these things, and I still really, really value that and appreciate it. So,
Cooper?
Yeah, that was well said. There's so much wisdom to be garnered from the generation before us. They've been there, and for me, it's been learning the why. I've never questioned whether or not anything that my family's done was the sensibility of it, because it was always well thought out. There was always a lot of thought put into things, and they were very good at what they did, and it was very intentional. And I think we need to remember that time can create that disconnect to where you don't. It's easy to get down and just do the work and forget to pick your head up and wonder why the heck your family's been doing it that way for 50 years. There was a starting point to where that was a really good idea, and it worked 50 years ago. And there's some real principles to be learned behind that. And it may not be what's right now, but there's a lot to be learned from understanding the why behind why people, the generation before and two generations before were doing certain things the way that they're doing. I mean, there's ranchers and farmers are very intent and efficient and super smart, and we're all observationists. We have to be. That's how you survive in order to connect the dots, and that's why we're all still here in the room, because of the generations that have come before us. I pay a lot of homage to those who've come before.
I'd add one thing too. I'd say, especially in the soil health space, somebody like me, I've got to see a lot of other people that to me, like the first generation soil health folks are folks that are probably all 15 or 20 or 25, maybe 30 years older than me. Because a lot of it, guys started in the 90s with some of this stuff, and they really were the true pioneers that did the hard stuff. I don't think it's now that there's these soil health events, it's easier for somebody like me to have a platform, and you don't. I mean, it's still a collection of village idiots here that gather, for something like this. But it was really, really lonely, with a guy that's been a huge mentor to me. I don't know if he's still here or not, but Rick Bieber, for example, how long that guy's been doing stuff out here in South Dakota. And so really having, especially in this space of regenerative ag, the people that have been pioneering it for our generation to kind of step in and, like you said, stand on their shoulders. So
yeah. To Cooper's point, G.K. Chesterton one time said, before you tear down a fence, ask why it was built. And that's something our generation needs to learn. Like, we got the match and the gasoline, we're ready to burn it all down, baby. But it doesn't always net great results. And sometimes there's a reason that fence was there. So, Jay, I want to ask you a question. How many stories of change that you are aware of were facilitated by crisis? I'd look at someone like Brendan Rocky, for instance, his what he's doing with potatoes now. And I just wonder, was he at a point of, and not him specifically necessarily, but how many of these guys were just totally last resort, last straw, this is the only way out kind of situations? And I think you've got a really unique, broad perspective to speak to that.
Excuse me. Well, I think the human perspective is always more willing to look at change when they're in crisis mode. And we're willing to adapt, we're willing to make these changes because of this stressor, right? Financial stress is one. There's many others, but that's maybe the more common one or the more one that we discuss. And I think when that occurs, we are willing to maybe open our minds a bit more, and we're willing to understand a concept. And so there's, in the federal government, there was some sayings, right? And people would have them on the bottom of their emails and such, and one of them was, don't expect somebody to understand something that's being paid not to understand it. And there was a lot of them, but that was one. And you start looking at that, and so when we become complacent, the only risk we have is stepping outside of whatever model you're in, right? Because there's no other way. But when you don't have that, or if there are people that are willing to make a change even when they're in that mode. But I think it still requires some type of change. It's family stress or health stress. To me, health stress is another really large one because you come to the point where you realize if you don't have adequate nutrition, you aren't going to do very well. And then you start thinking about your children, and you start thinking about your grandchildren, and then you start to realize, wow, we really should maybe make this change. So I think always some type of stressor. I think financial ones. I've worked through a number of people that were in that mode, and then you try to get a good description of what their goal is and what the scenario is, and then find in terms of health mode. I've seen that a number of times. People they want to make a change because of this. They don't feel they are growing nutritious food. And so there's a number of different stressors, but when those occur, that's when it changes maybe a little more readily available, if you will. So that would be, I guess, just observation of what I've seen over the years and people I've worked with over the years.
Yeah. So this panel is really inspiring to me because as I've sat in different sessions this week and looked around, I've been able to spot one or all of them in every session. And that's not common. When you go to conferences, a lot of times speakers, and I know speakers are in high demand and they go where they're asked to go, and sometimes that means they leave early or whatever, but these guys are here and they're here to learn and they're asking questions. And so I would like to, and all of you too, I mean, my favorite part about this conference is the diversity of age in this room of people who are young and learning and people who are not as young and still here to learn, and that is really inspiring to me. But in 10 minutes, we're gonna go to our board members and start taking questions from the crowd. But then the questions will get harder, guys. So gird up your loins. But I would just like to ask each of you guys to speak to the importance of lifelong learning from your perspective and some of the ways that you've gone about doing that. So Glenn, if you want to start us off.
When we started ranching, I was a forester for the BLM. I was a BLM forester and had about 8 employees, and didn't really like the way it was going. We were in the middle of all these environmental appeals, and it was, it's basically, I wasn't having fun anymore. I was going to work, And my wife was in the same boat. She's a PhD plant ecologist. She was working for the agencies as well. And, we were in our 30s. We were just starting a family, and we said, why don't we try to get back in agriculture? Because we both had agriculture backgrounds, and we thought, hey, why don't we give a stab at this? This ranching thing's got to be pretty easy. I mean, these guys, they ship these dang calves off, and, well, crap, they're worth so much money. Back then, a calf was worth about $300, and it's like they get all that money. And we're like, oh, my gosh, that's inconceivable. And the work's all fun, and there's no cost, and ignorance is bliss, and ignorance also led us down the garden path of deception and darkness. But anyway, here we are.
Boy, this turned in a hurry.
So, but you talk about being a lifeline learner. That was a fast track for us. Thank God we had the people we bought that first ranch from. They asked if they could stay with tears in their eyes. There's no deal if you don't stay. You're going to have a lifetime of stay. You're staying in right 100% of your dang house right there. And they actually thought that was wonderful because they wanted to see some grandkids. And, so they were kind of adopted grandparents, but they were adopted parents for me. And they really taught us so much. They just taught us, we never went to college for this. I was a forester. Carol was a PhD plant person, and they taught us just redneck cowboy wisdom, just every day, just pounded it into us. And I think that's we loved what we were doing before this, but it wasn't fun, and this was fun, and that's what fun is for me. It's learning, and so of course we want to be a lifetime learner. Jay had that book list up there. It's like, wow, that was a lot of books. And fortunately, I've got a little start on it. I've read a few of them, but I took a picture of it because, yeah, of course, because it's fun. It's fun, especially when you get an idea. Like I was at Cooper's talk, and man, I got some good ideas. I'm going to run home with them. I am going to tell my kids on the way home tomorrow, recalculate that stockpile. We're going to move those dang mother cows twice a day, okay? And so, yeah, it's just what makes it fun, and who doesn't want to have fun?
Besides, you get to blame Cooper if it doesn't work. So, I mean, it's even better.
Yeah.
Zach, lifelong learning.
Yeah, for me, it's just not being stagnant, and that's the part of the reason that I, wanted to come into this space is I got completely bored with the production agriculture system I was in, and this soil health space made me stretch and push, and I had to be vulnerable enough to know that I realized I didn't know anything, and compared to a lot of the people here, I still don't know everything or a long ways from it, and so I like feeling insignificant because I want to, or maybe that's the wrong word, but I like the feeling of not knowing everything because it keeps me hungry for getting up and wanting to consume more things. And I don't read as much as I do, but I'm a huge consumer of, I think YouTube is an absolute wonderful thing to just constantly be intaking. And I take in stuff all the time, different ways people think, different ways people do things, and not just in the business of agriculture too. I like to look at a lot of thought leaders outside of this space too. But for me, it's almost a necessary thing because a lot of the folks that I live around, they're totally fine and satisfied with get up and doing the same thing every year, with or without change. And if I was doing that, I wouldn't be farming anymore. I love the adversity. I love that every year is different, and you have to think critically and be observant, and look around you and adapt to where the times are. And there's a whole bunch of things, right now that I'm thinking about for, the next couple of years, not only with stock cropper, but I'm trying to get out in front of. And you've got to be hungry to learn all the time to stay in front of those things. So
Here's your obligatory Jeff Ramsire quote, though, Zach. corn, soybeans, Florida is a really hard crop rotation to compete with.
Yeah, it is, but it's getting more popular by the year, unfortunately.
Cooper, lifelong learner.
Yeah, I think being a lifelong learner is just an absolutely invaluable trait. Some of the people that I admire the most and generations above me were all and are all lifelong learners. And you can spot them. They got a sparkle in their eye. I'm inspired by many of you sitting here. I think, and even it is hard in agriculture to I shouldn't say hard, but it's easy to get just sucked down into the work, and you're just trying to keep your head above water, and it's easy to not come to these things and to not watch the YouTube videos. But like it or not, one fortunate thing that we do have going for us is we will get it beaten into us by Mother Nature. We absolutely get humbled every year, and because of that, thank God, we're set up to be lifelong learners, even if it's not ingrained in us. So it's something that I hold dear and I aspire to, and don't take for granted.
Mother Nature is undefeated, right? Jay, what?
So I think for me, real learning started, what I refer to as real learning. It started when I admitted to myself how little I knew. And at that point, my mind opened up. And at that point, I started my goal wasn't to specialize. My goal was, because nature is not one item, right? And so my goal was to go over a number of topics. And the fascinating thing about that is some days you would connect two dots. Man, that was a good day. I mean, that day, everything is good. And then when you did that, the thing that I found out is more dots came into focus that I couldn't see before, okay? So it was a process where you started to slowly accumulate information. And Kathy and I travel quite a bit together now at this stage in our lives, and that accumulating knowledge is kind of interesting because what I observed one day, we're finishing a workshop and visiting with some people, in one end of the room, but I got corner of my eye, I can see my wife in the background, and she's surrounded by these three guys. What's the long overcoats? You call that a duster? What do you call that? Slicker? Duster?
Sure.
Okay, and they had the big hats on. They had the ZZ Top beards, These were some tough-looking dudes, And they are talking to my wife in the back of the room, and they're all standing there like they're in a huddle. And I'm visiting with this person, but I'm really keeping a look on them. Do I have to go over there and help my wife out, or, and all this. And so all of a sudden I noticed the hats go, and then they walked out of the room. And so afterwards, we're driving, and she's not saying anything, So finally I said, are you going to tell me what that conversation was in the back of the room? And she said, they aren't satisfied with their daily gains on their yearlings, and they were wondering what they should do. And she said, I told them they might want to consider a little faster move, higher plane of nutrition when that's involved, and I think you'll be more satisfied with how this thing works out. And I said, honey, did I ever tell you how much I love you? So it's like that, right? It's like that as you go down that road. But I think you got to get to the point where, there's more gratitude, less attitude, and you opened up your mind, and your goal is to collectively share information and do those type things.
Very good. I got a couple of board members with microphones around. If they'd stand up and you raise your hand, they'll come to you with a microphone. While we're waiting for some hands to raise, I'm going to ask Glenn one question. Whose education was more valuable in your ranching career, yours or your wife's? You were a forester, and your wife was a PhD botanist. Whose education has proved more valuable?
By far my wife's.
Would you like to expound on that, or
So,
I can send her this recording too.
so actually, I'm going to bribe you not to.
Okay.
Yeah, she just, she's a community ecologist. She's written books about monitoring and plant populations and how they interact. She's this incredible statistician. She understands, the flux of population dynamics. And that's basically what we do. We're population managers. We're managing, we think of our cattle afoot, we think of our grasslands, we think of the wildlife that we interact with. But now, like a storm, we're learning about the microbial world underfoot. And it just blows me away. I come to a conference like this, I feel like I'm just moving in these incremental steps of being incredulous about the beauty, diversity, functionality of what's happening underground. She already brought that to the table. Yeah, she didn't have an understanding about the particular processes, but she understood the community relationships more than I ever did. And so, I'll come in from, I talked about this calving thing where these mama cows, when left alone, will, they'll leave some nursery maids behind, and they'll be watching over 60 calves that were born within the last 2 weeks. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's, she's observing that first. And, then I made the connection. It's like, this is actually like the Sandhills calving system. Nature already had this in place. And it's because, these calves stay on their bugs, but the cows already figured that out, and she observed it. She said, hey, what do you think? She'll say, what's going on out there with this relationship of these animals, And so she's an observer that way because it pulls the trigger in her. And that's really, the key to observation is to have a framework to hang it on. And then it can pull a trigger in her crystalline mind, my concrete one. So, I think that's been invaluable because it fast-tracked our learning process and being able to learn from nature itself.
Sean's got a microphone here with Dennis.
Jay, you talked about biology being in the corn plant from top to bottom. Is it your opinion that biology would prefer not to be in a BT corn plant?
Well, it's going to be in both. But I think, you're looking at different lignin structures, you're looking at different plant structures in terms of how it was processed. And we've had some lengthy conversations on this past week. So I'm watching this podcast with Dr. James White, rhizophagy, and in it he makes this comment about if you're going to move, you can move forward to a certain point using soil inoculants, etc., but you might have to look at keeping your own seed in a scenario in order to make it fully evolve. Because the seeds we're using today, they're growing in an environment that's extremely high input. And likely, I can't speak definitively, but likely in a more lower microbial environment. And so that seed starts out a little bit handicapped then, if you will, in relation. So did I dance around that adequately?
You did fine. My cows particularly don't enjoy BT corn stalks.
Yeah, you're going to find a higher lignin in there.
Well, I just wondered if
Yep.
the cows don't like it,
No.
does the biology not like it also?
Yeah, we grow one, we're a demonstration farm, so we grow one conventional hybrid field, and we'll grow one GMO field. So I have a corn bean field, and I monitor, because I got to have something for comparisons, et cetera. And when it comes to grazing, they'll take the conventional hybrid first every time, because you're looking at increased lignin structure to allow corn plant to stand through
longer periods of time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cody, you got a question?
Yeah, this is a question for Cooper. I'm curious the dynamics of your path from graduating high school, going to college, working on 5, 6 different ranches. If you were to do it over again, would you go to college? Would you just go to the ranches and get back to yours quicker? Just thinking of I have some kids already, and looking at what should I push them to do? At that point, was it your idea? Was it your dad's idea to experience all of that after leaving home? So.
That's a great question. To the last part of that question, I think it was a combination of myself or my own idea to go out. So I guess before I jump into that, the timeline was I graduated from high school. Before graduating from high school, I grew up in Montana. I knew where I was going to be the rest of my life. So I thought getting out of state would probably do me some good. So I applied to ag business at a school called Cal Poly in California and got accepted. And then I deferred my enrollment a year. I decided to go work on the ranch for a full year, which I'd never done. So I had a better foundation when I did go and study at college. And so I did that. And then I wasn't ready to come home. And it was also part of my family culture. They wanted me to go out and experience other things and work for other people and prove myself in other systems, and they just turned me loose, basically. I was given 4 years after graduating before it was that window was going to close and I needed to come home. And so because I had such a finite time of 4 years, and I also understood how daunting of a job I had to come back to take the family place and try and shepherd it forward into the future, then I wanted to go and work on ranches that were doing things, remarkable things, practicing holistic management successfully and had been for decades. I hunted them up, and I wanted to be in different environments and different cultures just to get myself out of my comfort zone so I could steepen that learning curve. And so I worked on 2 ranches in Mexico and a ranch in Colorado for Duke Phillips for 2 years, which was amazing. And then Argentina, Patagonia, 2 stations in Australia, and then I was tapped to come home. And would I do it the same? 100%. I do question, and sorry for academics in here, but there is a disconnect between what's actually happening on the ground, in my opinion, and academics. What Jay and his cohorts are doing at Menoken Farm and a few others are doing truly meaningful work that is changing and impacting acres. But the reason, so I do question, the validity. I hear where you're coming from and questioning the validity of going to school. But what does happen at school that I think is invaluable is you learn how to learn. I wouldn't change that. You learn how to learn, you learn how to communicate. You have to write essays, you have to compose emails. And if you don't have that skill, that's a limitation. And if you want to be as impactful as you possibly can, then that means shouldering as much responsibility as you possibly can. And that means being able to communicate, and that means being able to learn. And so that, for me, I wouldn't change anything of what I did. I feel like the stars aligned, and that's how it needed to be for me. Yeah, thank you.
Other questions from the audience? Just keep your hand up and they'll bring you a microphone. Otherwise, you have to go back to listening to my questions. Hey, we got one. Sweet.
This question's for both Glenn and Cooper. What would you say as a percentage to get your cattle to grade? How quickly do you need to change your genetics, or how much of a percentage is that to reach your goals?
Grade on grass? So
Correct.
I think genetics can be overrated. We have seen differences in genetics, but we run pretty conventional Angus cattle. We found that the ones on the larger frame side are virtually impossible to get the grade. So that's a real general difference, and it's just completely phenotypic. I mean, you can observe these cows, observe these calves coming off these cows as long as they're in a yearling state, and say that one will grade just because of what their frame looks like. I have been wrong, but 90% chance you're probably going to be able to nail it. So these people who sell strictly grass-based genetics, I'm not saying they're wrong, and it's cool to focus on that. I wish I had the margin to do that. But commercial cattle have worked pretty well for us, but we are picky about, maintaining that heterosis. We just do an F1 cross. We're running Hereford bulls on black cows, and that's worked pretty well. What Cooper's doing with, heterosis and composites it's an ideal, and I just we don't have the margin to achieve that in our situation right now. Perhaps one of my kids want to go down that road because there's a lot of wisdom in that path, and I think more consistency in the cattle. The offspring are way more consistent through generations and predictable in terms of finish, especially if you're, if you've built a pretty consistent frame choice through that, the selection of those composites. So to me, it's really, really, the supercontinental breeds, just because of their phenotype, it's not only frame size, but who they come from. They're just shortly traceable back to draft breeds, combination breeds that are either draft milk or meat or, multi-purpose breeds. They just, are more difficult in general to be able to get to grade. So we stick with Highland genetics, and predominantly Angus, and make sure that they're British. And like I said, sometimes we're wrong, but pretty consistently we can get them to grade pretty easily on grass. But then it becomes really a question of the grass and grass management. It's all about creating energy. You have to create energy. And it's about life stage. Some of the stuff like mob grazing or Jaime Elizondo's process of total grazing, I just don't think you're going to be able to get that with those kind of management regimes. You just need that energy to be able to force that grade, especially before that arbitrary 30-month window that USDA put on for mad cow disease. So, if we're going to achieve that under 30 months, you got to pick a phenotype, and you got to really manage that grass in an intensive way.
Is there somebody that helped you learn to look at cattle and pick which ones were going to more likely grade than not?
It was them. So, it's because we're standing there in the corral and we pick 15 head every 2 weeks forever. And then you just look at the results the next day and see how we hung up, and then you get the stakes in your hand in 2 weeks. And it's just, it's a rude awakening sometimes. You learn what to look for and where to find that fat and where to find that deposition just on that phenotype. These cattle have been living with us all our lives. The mama cows, I don't care about disposition. I don't care if they're ready to kill you. We'll absolutely keep those cows because those kind of dispositions are very valuable to us in terms of maternals. But the yearlings, they live with us, in cow camp. So that means I can just walk right up to them. We can get really close and look at that escutcheon area, look at that tail head, look at brisket, look at, rib cover and pin bone. And you can put it all together in kind of a gestalt view of that entire animal. And with practice, even my kids and my employees, my ranch hands can pick it out now and say, yes, that one's got a great choice.
So the answer to that question about who taught you to grade is that Glenn will put out a clinic every 2 weeks at his house where he'll teach you how to pick animals that will grade, I think is what you were saying. Was that question for Cooper too about selecting animals that will grade? Or
I don't know if I'll be able to answer that question well. I don't have the feedback loop that Glenn does on the grass-fed, grass-finished. I did share that photo of a grass-fed steak from some of our composite genetics. We sell 50 to 80 grass-fed beef through a Missoula company every year, and so I get some feedback loop from that. I personally don't see the carcasses or anything like that, but what I do believe is that if they're truly functional on the range, especially in that type of model that I was talking about earlier, they will finish well on grass, because what you're selecting for in that system is doability on grass. You're selecting for body condition. And it seems like the two go hand in hand.
Brian, did you have another one? Brian does not. Sean, you got one?
Yep, over here with Charlie.
Charlie, do you have something to say about the genetic question? He raises bulls.
Okay, so I'm a seed stock producer, but I got seriously moderate frame cattle, and I'm a low input. We don't feed any grain. And my question is for Cooper. When you mentioned the scrotal measurement should be adjusted to the weight, do you have a scale? Or my vet won't even test them if they ain't measuring 30. She won't even ask me how old they are. You know, we calve as late as we can and still sell yearling bulls. And so the scrotal measurement is kind of my question. Do you have a scale on how much they should weigh per centimeter?
Like a template?
Yeah.
You know, I don't. It's just information that I've been collecting on our own home-raised bulls. We'll take their individual. So how we select them is when they're 10 to 12 months old, we'll put them all in the corral. We'll run them across the scale. We'll get individual weights. We'll run them through the chute. We'll get individual hip heights. We'll measure their scrotals. I put all of that in relationship to their actual size. And then the main culling criteria, aside from disposition or anything under I'm the same. Anything under 30 centimeters, they're not going to make the cut, or they make the cut, however you want to look at it. Thank you.
He'll be He'll be here for another half an hour.
Right. And then I got this from Zeitzman, where you can project their mature weight based off of their individual hip height. From this appendix at the back of his book, it's from a study from state of Missouri or Missouri Extension, and then you can take their individual weight and see how much of a percentage of their projected mature weight they are, and the higher percentage of their projected mature weight, the earlier sexual maturing, the more fertile, the higher doability on grass, and that's where our main culling and selection criteria comes from. And when I do buy outside bulls, the information I ask for is individual hip height, individual weight. I come up with the ratios, and that seems to be the biggest or best indicator for how they're going to grow out that I've seen.
Okay, we're going to take one more audience question. I want to respect everybody involved in putting this on. I want to respect their time. And so we're going to take one more audience question. Yep, go ahead.
What would be your best advice for a young person going into regenerative ag for education?
We'll just make that our last question, and all four of you can answer it, because I can't beat that. So,
I think the best advice would be to kind of emulate what Cooper's done. Find that area that you're interested in, and it might be a trigger that's going to send you to something completely different, and that's totally okay. I think it's about, we talked a lot about that transgenerational wisdom, the older people and the people in the middle of it. What a wonderful experience it would be that you just came out and you came onto my ranch for 6 to 8 months, and then you went and worked over with Zack and then Cooper. I mean, can you imagine? And what you're going to get from that is possibility. If you commit to school right away. I'm a school dropout, and it took me a long time to get through. It's because, I kept doing all these experiences because they actually paved the way into creating new possibilities in my mind, and it was fun. It was fun because I was learning all this different stuff. I mean, that's why I got into cattle in the first place. I was between school opportunities, and I worked for a ranch in Salmon, Idaho. And I was like, I can't believe these people get to do this. I just had nothing but fun for the entire time. And so that's what I would say is, like, find out people who are in it. And, you can find them on Instagram. You can find them by word of mouth. And go visit with them and go work for them. And if you got the bandwidth, it's okay to do it for free. It's okay. That's the way I worked for like 5 different ranches for free, because I knew I was going to cost them. So anyway, that's what that would be my advice. It's the same advice I got for my kids.
Go ahead.
I'd echo a lot of it. I don't have a ton to add. I would echo Cooper's comments. I believe strongly that the education I received in college wasn't incredibly pertinent to what I'm doing now, but it was the life skills that I developed in that. So I would say, and specifically getting exposed to people that are different than your background has been one of the most valuable things. I talked about yesterday being in a rock and roll band. So I was studying agronomy, and I was hanging out with indie rock kids in the 90s. And so there was a totally different crowd, and so there was a lot of value in that. And the other thing I would say to somebody that's young in regenerative ag is learning how to communicate with people, not only in agriculture, but the consumer class that you're going to be trying to be marketing in, and going and spending in time communicating with people. One of my favorite activities to do when I'm working on designing cluster clucks in Milwaukee, we go to the dive bars, or I shouldn't say the dive bar, we go to the bars, and I love talking to vegans. That's one of my favorite things. And learning how to have them scream and yell at you until you're the worst person in the world, and talk for 30 minutes and convince them to maybe have a chicken out of a cluster cluck by the end of it. And so there's a real art to that, rather than just saying they don't know anything. They don't know some things, but they are willing to listen if you're willing to be calm and communicate with them respectfully. And so I would really encourage young folks in ag to get into the cities and figure out how to communicate with those folks.
I'm pretty sure that makes Zach the Dave Grohl of regenerative agriculture. So,
man, that's a great title, because Dave is one of my heroes. So.
Go ahead, Cooper.
I think continuing to go to things like this, working with and for your family, and absorbing as much of that cultural and inherent wisdom, and then once you're ready, doing what Glenn mentioned, and just finding people who inspire you, or things that you're passionate about that people are doing, and then going out. And I was like Glenn, I was willing to work for free. I mean, I treated it like it was my master's program. And have a great time, have fun, but be really intent about what you do. And I think it'll all just unfold. That's what I'd recommend.
Jay?
So I'd probably start, if your topic is regenerative ag and your goal is to move into that, you can't regenerate without carbon in some form or fashion, okay? And so my thought on it would be learn the carbon cycle, learn the 4 parts of carbon, learn where they are in a plant, okay? Seed, fiber, the root mass, etc., the exudates, learn where they are, and learn how to sequester it, and maybe even more importantly, learn how to lose it, okay? Because if you're really good at losing it, you know what you need to do to keep it, okay? So you start going through carbon and understand that it's also a cycle. But if you understand all of that, will help you whether you go into cropping, vegetable production, orchards, grasslands, wherever you end up, whatever that is. And so if you can do all that, recite all that, get in an elevator and talk to anybody about it, and by the end of the elevator ride, they know what you know, right? And so I'd start there.
Very good. Well, honestly, when I looked at the schedule and I saw that these 4 individuals are going to be on the stage at the end of the conference, and I saw how early they were here, I couldn't believe that they would still be here by the end of the conference. And so I'm incredibly thankful to them for sticking around and taking time to do that. So let's give them a hand.